You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Welcome, everyone, to a webinar entitled Center for the Study of the Great Ideas, Philosophy is Everybody's Business, presented by Elaine Weissman. My name is Sebastian Mahfood, and I am the director of ITEST. The Institute for Theological Encounter with Science and Technology, ITEST, is an association of theologians, scientists, and others committed to a Catholic worldview in which faith and science collaborate in exploring the truth. ITEST explores truth theologically in the wisdom traditions of the human community and in the data studied in the sciences. ITEST's mission is to foster and disseminate the Catholic position that science and faith in God are complementary paths to human fulfillment. Before I introduce our presenter, Father Vincent Uke, retired priest of the Diocese of Trenton, New Jersey, will offer our opening prayer. Father Uke?
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Father, help us to combat the pragmatic philosophy which has infiltrated our world, so that we can come to appreciate that truth and the values that are truly absolute and unchanging. Help us to rediscover and promote these universal truths in our schools, high schools, and universities, so that the most ordinary of citizens may think more clearly and exercise their free will wisely. You have given us the natural laws which give us the desire to be charitable and to wish each other well, so that our youth can apply themselves to adapt to this peaceful way of life. We ask this through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God forever and ever. Amen.
Thank you, Father Uke. For the Q&A segment which follows Elaine Weissman's presentation, please direct your attention to the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. During her presentation, feel free to type your questions as they come to you. Questions will, and if you type them as they come to you, we'll have an opportunity to organize them when we hit the Q&A. Please note that all participants will remain muted through the webinar. If you wish, you may also turn off your video. And now I'm delighted to introduce our presenter, Elaine Weissman, the director for the Center for the Study of the Great Ideas. Elaine graduated from Aquinas Dominican High School and attended Barat College of the Sacred Heart in Lake Forest, Illinois, where she majored in psychology and French and graduated magna cum laude. She was administrative assistant to the head of the psychology department for 2 years. She married Max Weissman, who, with Dr. Mortimer Adler, founded the Center for the Study of the Great Ideas, and after her husband's passing in 2017, assumed the presidency of the center. The responsibilities revolve around converting Dr. Adler's 16mm philosophical films to tapes and videos, and now DVDs, and soon streaming. The center also organized successful seminars for Dr. Adler. They published in 2000 the book, How to Think About the Great Ideas from the Great Books of Western Civilization, by Dr. Adler and edited by Max Weissman, which is available on Amazon. So with that, I welcome Elaine Weissman. Elaine, it's all yours.
Thank you, Sebastian. Good morning, everyone from ITEST and the Center for the Study of the Great Ideas. My name is Elaine Weissman, president and publisher of the center, after the passing of my husband, Max Weissman, in 2017. He founded the center in 1990 with Dr. Mortimer Adler, who passed in 2001, and together they created our website, thegreatideas.org, which is the only website that is sanctioned by Dr. Adler. I'm sure you would all enjoy this presentation much more if you had these two dynamic men, but today you have me. But from its beginning, I have been a very sincere participant in all aspects of the center. I want to introduce Dr. Adler and Max to you so you know their backgrounds and their purpose for the center. Knowing both of them, they are standing behind me right now, whispering corrections and additions, and you can believe that. You will remember Dr. Adler as the creator of the Great Books and the Great Books Foundation. He was a curmudgeon in every sense of the word, and I would say that if he were standing here. His early life was not without unique beginnings. First of all, he quit high school in order to join the New York Sun paper because he actually thought he would become a journalist until he decided that journalists didn't really require any education. So that would not be a job he'd want. From there, he went to Columbia, even though he did not graduate, and he was teaching law and psychology. It's there that he met Robert Hutchins, who was very young and who became the president of the University of Chicago. This is around 1930. He convinces Dr. Adler to move to Chicago because he desperately desires to improve the educational environment to include liberal arts for all studies. He did not want to do what most college presidents do and get bogged down in budgets and seeking donations to the university. When he saw Dr. Adler's list of the great books, he was unhappily shocked that he had read maybe 2 or 3. So he wanted to work in tandem with Dr. Adler in the teaching seminars, which he did, to learn more. This event in 1930 was monumental, as all is happening. And it was to change the University of Chicago with liberal arts to be included in every single study, from doctors, lawyers, accountants, and teaching. It was absolutely a brand new idea. They were both not without their critics, especially Dr. Adler. In fact, if you look at these proposed ideas, both men had the same uphill problem in 1930 now there is today with teachers and curriculums. The teachers then actually thought that the students should have more say in what they were taught. And of course, Dr. Adler said, you're here to lead them, not to let them choose. And so after he left Columbia, where he had whetted his interest in the great book studies and was turned on to continuing that study by classes with John Erskine. So instead of teaching law and psychology, he taught the great books with Mark Van Doren, which gave him the background that he brought to the University of Chicago. When he left Columbia, he did the same thing that he did in high school. No diploma, because he would not take the required swimming class to graduate. So that was the end of that, but they did reinstate him and his high school years later. According to Dr. Adler's most philosophical endeavor, and this was one of his best achievements, was in creating this Topicon index to the great ideas, which many of you may have already looked at. 102 ideas, with many well-known philosophers contributing thoughts on each of the subjects. The reason it came about was because Thomas Benton, who was behind the creating of the great ideas, decided that the great books, rather, with the great ideas, decided that he wanted it sold in sets. So everybody had the books. A lot of the other people thought, maybe they should just have a list and let them go out and get the books we're recommending. And he said, absolutely not. They might not be able to find them and then they'll give up or they'll get disinterested. We're going to provide them, which was a very expensive thing to do. And then Britannica got involved. So they said, you better come up with something that'll help market the great books. And it was Dr. Adler's idea that we write a Syntopicon. He had no idea it would take 8 years and cost close to $900,000. But it worked because people looked at that with the ideas and then wanted to read the book. So it was really a great marketing ploy that he came up with. but 8 years of work, and many times they were going to give up, but they made all the money back plus. Now, if we background Max Weissman, that type of independent thinker remains common to both. Max went to Lane Tech High School, and that was, at that time, a vocational teaching school. And he became a welder, and then after having a serious motorcycle accident, he was skilled at any type of hand-eye coordination. He could race motorcycles and cars, never had an accident. But on the day that he got his new motorcycle, this is probably when he's 20 or 21, he was on the road and an elderly woman went right through a stop sign at around 30 miles an hour. And he had a very bad broken leg and was laid up for close to a year. And so while he was there, he decided to go into architecture as an apprentice, which is the way they did it then. And then he was taught on-the-job training and mentored in all aspects of building, space planning, and basically construction of entire cities, because that's what it requires when you're building an exhibit as large as what he was in charge of, Expo 67 in Montreal. And he was the owner's representative. Then the New York World's Fair, Portland Fair. He got into restaurant design, which may sound exciting, but it is also extremely, extremely difficult. And you really have to know what you're doing. Later, we married, and he got the great offer, which he loved, was building the Chicago Botanic Garden in Glencoe. If you've never gone there and have never seen how beautiful it is, you really should go. And this was in the 70s. And he too, at that time, was the owner's representative, and all that property was privately owned by the likes of people, Armour, Bayer, and it was donated to the Botanic Garden. And everyone was so delighted that the state of Illinois, and we all know the state of Illinois, has nothing to do with it. Can't get involved, can't do any of their usual. So it's just been able to blossom, and it's beautiful. It was his favorite job, actually, in terms of driving out there every morning. It was fabulous. And then after that, a year in Sarasota on another venture, he was asked to recycle the City Hall in Rochester, New York, as the city's rep. And we lived there for close to 3 years and loved it. And then he decided, and I'm along with all of this because I worked for him on all these jobs, which was actually very convenient. Then we returned to Chicago, and he invented a proprietary printing system, which was proprietary and also a very great idea because it used water and not lacquer. So people weren't coughing, and they didn't have to have a million fans. And the Pantone system, which is the best color system around even today, was the one that we had a contract with. The name of the company was Coloron Corporation. It lasted for 20 years until the computer. And unfortunately, computers did not do the kind of work and quality that we did, but ours was hands-on. Computers were cheaper. So after that, that's when the dream came to play that this was the time to do the center. And so he talked with his mentor, Dr. Adler, who happened to live 2 blocks down the street from us on State. And they created the website, which is the only one that has Dr. Adler's name on it. So while honing his skills in construction, a close friend took him to a Great Books meeting. It was his first time, but not his last. And now I'm going back to when he was around 20, to the first reading, which was Plato's Apology. That blew his mind. And it was also Adler's favorite. And he thought, I don't know anything about these books, because Lane Tech was not liberal arts. So I'm going to read you a little paragraph of a letter he sent to his brother back when he was about 20 or 21, told him to hang on to it, and I'll ask for it later because I want to see what I wrote. So here's the quote. Through reading, we can experience things that normally we never could. The greatest book I've ever read is the Bible. We recently read it, studied it, and discussed it, not as a religious book, but as a book. We are not concerned with whether a person is Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, or Jewish, or what religion says about it. We are only concerned what it says to you, to us. You must read something like that with an open mind and not as your religious affiliation. More often than not, a person of a certain religion is of a certain religion because their parents were, and that's how they're raised, and for no other reason. But this book teaches doctrine so profound that I now understand that we must be students of philosophy. So to prove his profound enlightenment, he actually sold his Hasselblad camera, which is considered the best and was most expensive. And he was also a great photographer. And he still continued with photography, but buying the great books was more important. I have to thank my own father for making me. He didn't ask me to go to Catholic high school and to Sacred Heart College. Even though I fought him tooth and nail because I was Orthodox, Greek Orthodox. And my father was a very hands-on dad. He said, someday you will thank me. I do, and I did. He said, when you tell people where you went to school, they will be so impressed, more than if you said Northwestern like your sister who went there. And it did happen, just as my father said. But of course, I was sitting at a table with Irish lawyers and judges. So of course they were happy. That liberal arts education was what Max was learning through the great books. And it's exactly what Hutchins wanted for the University of Chicago. So there's really nothing new in the way that people look at education, because he had a heck of a time. They both did with the teachers. So Max did not go to college, but when he was in Canada, he took classes at McGill, and he now carried with him the experiences of other men who would cast a light on the reader's life so that he could understand and make good judgments, which is its purpose, and live a happier life. Although Max, and this is true, had a tiny bit more patience when teaching, Dr. Adler had a minimum, which he would agree with if he were here. For example, when he was giving instruction for the students to read Oedipus Rex, he was stunned, and this used to bother him to no end, that not one student raised his hand to say what the play was saying to the reader. And he told me he slumped in his chair, and finally a student raised his hand excitedly and said that he knew the message that Dr. Adler and Oedipus Rex was trying to say. And so Dr. Adler said, "What is it?" And the boy said, "Incest is all right as long as you keep it in the family." And Dr. Adler had a great sense of humor. Well, he just loved it. But he got a response, which is what he cared about. And so he didn't care if it was on the mark or not. It was just so clever. So now you have the backgrounds, and you can see that they're more alike than different. And now we're going to speak to why Dr. Mahfoud saw the potential of creating a partnership between the Center and ITEST, the Institute for Theological Encounter with Science and Technology, Faith and Science. The truth is, there is a very strong connection here. So I will alter the capital C in Catholic to a small c so that this connection looks more like a universal one, which it is. It's not about the Catholic Church per se. We realize today, and some of us don't even know what they're doing to be frank with you. They're not exactly telling everybody what they're into, but the fast track for technology is on and will continue into the future. It's moving very, very fast and affecting principles that are tied to the way we live. We can turn to our faith, but the larger picture is encased in the common idea that philosophy is everybody's business, which is what Dr. Adler coined and is the title of the seminar. We don't have to examine what churches have to say because what they propose is already intrinsically meshed in the philosophers who have taken positions, and that from the faiths who have found their birth from philosophy. For Aristotle in 2500 BC, Adler wrote Aristotle for everybody so that no one could miss what this genius was saying, and who with Aquinas is grounded in the capital C Catholic faith. When we speak of the moral virtues, he is delineating them for the first time that anybody did that. Courage, prudence, temperance, and justice. Aristotle was not thinking of religion. It hadn't really been born yet. And he's not promoting that we all go out and try to be perfect in these four areas, because not only would it be highly impossible, as that is a goal, but that these virtues will help in the judgments that we use in order to live a better life. If you read the Nicomachean Ethics, which was the one that really got to me, and it is in our store as a DVD, and of course you can buy it as a book, you'll be blown away by Aristotle's fine-tuned mind for examination, knowledge, understanding, and then hopefully wisdom. He didn't learn this from his parents, but from the astounding men around him, like Plato and Socrates, and through observation and experience. But to be so obviously intelligent, to have put this together as a means of living, and that's what that book is all about. It's really incredible what we owe to the ancients. And it's not just because I'm Greek, but that's the truth. So if we didn't have leaders like the people I just mentioned, we wouldn't have the religions that follow. It is philosophy that laid all that groundwork for thoughts that you can use to examine what is right and wrong and what constitutes good or evil for mankind. Philosophy and faith is like a tandem bike moving in the same direction and each benefiting from each other's ideas. So let's turn to science and what Dr. Adler warned us about. He's referring in the following quote that science can be misdirected or used with good purpose and results. And I think we've seen quite a bit of things that are going on now, whether you're talking about abortion or having robots. And the reason is because science is investigative and they work in all different areas. When Aristotle was alive, it was one area, and that's what he discussed in terms of what science was. And of course, you know, they went into every avenue of living. And then they pooled together. But philosophy has one added area, which is prescriptive. And this is the quote: without the prescriptive knowledge given us by ethical and political philosophy, we have no guidance in the use of that power, directing it to the ends of a good life and a good society. The more power science and technology confer upon us, the more dangerous and malevolent that power may become, unless it's checked and guided by moral obligations stemming from our philosophical knowledge, or how we ought to conduct our lives and our society, end of quote. And this dilemma is what we are all up against. In science, there are no oughts. They deal with the reality that is in their scope. They are divided into many disciplines so that they're not under one roof as Aristotle was. But they share what they have found with one another to expedite agreement or non-agreement with their findings. And we can only hope that what the findings are correct. But philosophy doesn't do that. Each philosopher comes to his own conclusion. How much better, Dr. Adler thought, if they work together, since the subject matter rests on the thought that all men have. And I'm using men because it's too hard to say men and women. And besides, it's obvious that all men have the same needs. On the other hand, philosophy can examine the past, all the way back to Aristotle, 2500 BC, for what he said and others. Science does not look back into the past. Current and forward, because they don't deal with oughts. They're not interested in them. But philosophy does, just as religion does. And the way that it proceeded after Aristotle was after the Dark Ages came and went, when they were still looking back to the ancients. Philosophy did revive the ancients then and refined and examined what they said. But then it turned, and it's still that way today. In the 17th century, philosophers like Descartes, Hobbes, etc., had relinquished the past philosophers as unimportant. And so then you have philosophers that are only talking about the now and what's in front of them. And of course, they all had different opinions. What a loss for all of us. And that attitude is prevalent in our schools today. Take Aristotle. If you have not read his Nicomachean Ethics, then you are missing truths which he found common to all men, which is why we can all discuss philosophy. And we all do discuss it, whether we're in a room or not. It's very natural to all people, and I mean any country, no matter where you are. Remember that these ideas were new then in ancient Greece. There was no history, really, from which they could go forward. And from that, we know, if we look at today and then, and things in between, that human nature has not changed. And when the Greeks were asked whether or not these ideas that they had as time went on would alter humankind, they would not get excited about it, because they did not think that you could pass on these ideas and everyone would become just richer and richer, and each generation would become wiser and wiser. So with philosophers dismissing Aristotle and Aquinas and all the ones that were prevalent then, they only dealt with current reality. But as humans, the current reality is not new or different from them, so why dispense with them? They were reflecting a time which is common to all, or we couldn't even discuss philosophy. That is the connection we have as human beings. There is a commonality, a fraternity. So you can have your own faith and religion or belief. You may be an atheist, and that is your belief. Regardless, when you see advances in science and technology, you have to seek out what is good for us. You can go to your faith or belief system, but to become knowledgeable about the consequences of science actions, you would want to read what others like philosophers have said, since they work together. If you found out that technology that is moving at a very fast pace, and that they have the tools right now. In fact, I think I read that Google is working on this from one of their divisions, I believe in England, to download your brain into a robot. And then, of course, there's cloning a human being. But there's a lot more they're doing that they don't talk about. And by the way, it's come to pass that these robots probably using what's in our brains do a better job. So I don't know what we're going to be good for, except taking care of the robot. Religion and faith would look to the past, whether you believe in God or not. There is a common fraternity among all men that what is good for one is good for the other. And that you can find in natural rights that stipulate you have a natural right to your needs, and all people have the same, but not to your wants, which are all different and cannot be good. And sometimes they are good. As you will turn to faith for answers, they will explore the consequences of science, but not its progression, as philosophy does. Science does not do any of that. It can't, because science is totally involved in investigation into new discoveries, wherever that leads them. But philosophy is prescriptive. And one of the main reasons for this discussion that I altered just for the sake of this presentation, that this partnership with ITEST is to convert people into Catholic thinking. No matter what faith you ascribe to, Muslim, Jew, or Methodist, you are faced with the exact same decisions to make. Universal issues that are not complicated by what science would call progress with abandon. Now, unfortunately, mankind has not progressed because Dr. Adler always thought that it's not asking the right questions. Are we accepting what science is doing now without thinking of the consequences? And they're becoming more and more serious because they are advancing very fast. And here we are standing with our hands in our empty pockets as if we have nothing we can do. Do we not all need to examine what's happening? And will certainly become issues in the future, some we don't even know yet. So if you take abortion, for example, science does agree that the fetus is human in conception. That is the majority of doctors and scientists. But it's really strange that since everybody works with the idea of what is current, they don't really want to hear that. So you would think that by what science says would become a fact, but not so. The abortion is now probably going to be appropriate in the 9th month, or as California has just approved, abortion within 28 days of birth, which is, well, it's incredible to me that laws have no basis on fact or on morality. I opine, and this is my opinion, that if a person decides to terminate a pregnancy, they should be shown the results of their actions, and the male involved as well. There are no consequences for any of this activity. You just fix it. That's the basic thing. And in one of his seminars, Max was confronted by a student who didn't believe that the fetus, because it didn't look like a human, was a human being at conception. And so he answered, that fetus is becoming a human being. No matter what you say, it cannot become a banana. And as I remember, he yelled it out. So, on the whole, philosophers, unlike scientists, do not argue with each other to find solutions. Dr. Adler probably was the best example of doing that. He wrote over 50 books. In fact, Amazon says 80 or more of reading material. So the business of the center now, and of Max and Dr. Adler, was to make available to members his writings and DVDs of his seminars and interviews in the near future, and we will have interviews in the near future, we will be using Zoom, which did not exist, believe it or not, in 2017 for Max to use. It is imperative that it is in the discussion of thoughts to others that makes the difference than just reading alone. And if you've ever been to these, everybody just doesn't sit there and give their opinions. There are questions, and the questions have to be answered by the attendees so that you can move forward in terms of what you're learning and understanding. So we have to have rational debate because reason was essential to the ancients and to us now. So Dr. Adler always thought philosophy should be in the realm of a public debate, not a private one. So we come to the oughts that philosophy provides, unlike science, which does not concern itself with oughts. And there is the rub. We have to take on the task of examining what they are proposing. Because it's happening all around us every day. And the idea of what is moral, what is good, never seems to come up in a conversation. Or you will just see the result of actions that were taken without it. Because philosophers always proceed on the common experience, which we all experience. Dr. Adler coined the words, philosophy is everybody's business. And that is why I am here to shed light on what the center offers in helping people use reason and critical thinking. We cannot allow science to make decisions for us because it does not concern itself with oughts, which are extremely important when you're making a decision, and it's not even in their realm of consideration. Just keep moving ahead. Philosophy does describe reality and gives prescriptives, while science only does the first one, reality. As I said before, when faced with a conflict in what science is progressing, philosophy is instrumental in aiding faith in the discovery of how to examine these happenings. They are not mutually exclusive. What is the best way to achieve happiness in life always depends on the good for which they both depend. Now I will read, as I'm getting close to closing, the following premise on which the center is based, and I am now quoting Adler. The only standard we have for judging all of our social, economic, and political institutions and arrangements as just or unjust, as good or bad, as better or worse, derives from our conception of the good life for man on earth and from our given certain external conditions. It is possible for men to make good lives for themselves by their own efforts. End of quote. Max had this printed on the wall in his office, and I'm reading it now because it has more impact, I think, on listeners after we've discussed philosophy as the handmaiden of faith, which is the way it should be looked at. Dr. Adler wrote a very important book with Charles Van Doren called How to Read a Book that the center has the right to publish exclusively by Britannica and is still in print, along with 14 additional short discussions on how they read a story. The center actually brought that book and dusted it off because even Britannica didn't know what they had in their reserves. So I think it's in the third or fourth printing, and it is a very big seller. And the center published a book, How to Think About the Great Ideas, from the Great Books of Western Civilization, and it is in print. So in the end of the stories, since both men have passed away, after Dr. Adler's wife passed away, Dr. Adler, who had been an Episcopalian, as was his wife, decided to become a Catholic and did so before he passed away and after her passing. And he was living at that time in San Mateo, because his wife was from California, and she unfortunately, her cancer returned and she wanted to be home with her family. She was a very sweet woman, and when one of the stations decided to go in and interview Dr. Adler, they asked her, "Are you into all this philosophy that your husband is?" And the answer, and I never forgot it, was, "Having one philosopher in the house is enough." So, to Dr. Adler, we're thankful for all his efforts throughout his life, from his job at the New York Sun, when he turned away from journalism, to philosophy, to diligently make us more aware of how to attain a good life. And so it is to Max Weissman that we are thankful for his devotion to philosophy and Doctor's influence, that nothing of all these valuable insights not be hidden in books, but brought forth into the sunshine for all of us to read and reread. He saw the need in his life, and he made it come to fruition for all of us. The center is offering the same complimentary membership for 1 year free that ITEST has for us. It will permit access to all the DVDs in our store, our journals weekly, and seminars. And as we improve and get into more areas, we're going to keep expanding. And the center thanks Dr. Mahmoud and ITEST for all their help in putting all of this webinar together. It is a huge project, as I, for the first time, having been involved, can tell you. And he's also aiding the center in other avenues of support, because we are going into streaming as well as the DVDs. So now you have the totem bonum of our presentation, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I did too. And thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Elaine, for your presentation. This has been a most excellent treat for the ITEST members, and I know for your group as well. For those of you who have questions, I would like to remind you to post them in the chat room at the bottom of your screen. We've got some questions that people have sent to Sheila already, and she's going to begin with those in our moderated Q&A session. So, Sheila, take it away.
All right. Thank you very much. Elaine, excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have some questions posted. Bruce says this: Dr. Adler noted that his focus was on Western philosophical thought. Given that scientific advances and their effects are worldwide, how does one bridge the oughts beyond Western values?
Not quite sure what the question. Can you repeat that?
Actually, maybe Bruce Adams would like to unmute and ask the question himself. Why don't we do that?
Yeah, thanks very much. This is Bruce. My question, when I've read Dr. Adler, his focus is traditionally on Western ideas, Western philosophy, and in the modern world, so much technology.
Bruce, I think we lost you. Are you still there? Bruce, can you maybe try asking again? Because I think we lost your question.
Advance. Okay, if you can hear me, I'm in a car and I apologize.
Okay.
So my question was, if Dr. Adler focused on Western philosophical thought, and he noted that his expertise and his reach did not philosophy. I note that China and the Far East in particular have major advances in science and technology. And the oughts will apply to them as well as to us. And I guess my question is to Elaine, how do we think about bridging the oughts that you're considering the moral philosophy of Western tradition? How do you bridge that to the Eastern philosophies?
If he were here and Max were here, they would say they do not have a religion at all. And therefore, their moral code is very different from ours. The end justifies the means. And that is going to be the biggest problem because we're so financially involved with them as to how we're going to control their oughts. They have no interest in those. And unfortunately, a lot of people in our government don't have it either. So how we're going to change them or be able to mesh is not going to happen easily, if at all. They have no oughts. So how can you teach them that? They will do whatever. If we take power back and they are beneath us, where there are controls that are set up by us from a moral standard, then we can do something about it. But that is a very serious dilemma of what could happen if they were to take over. They do it to their own people. They're doing it now. What can you say to them? Don't do it. It's not right. They don't care. They don't have the same background that we have. Does that help you?
It does very much. Thank you. One follow-up, if I may. Does the Buddhist tradition affect that at all? I had always understood that Buddhism had a philosophy based on relief of suffering. And I'm wondering if that's at least one small principle of an ought, because I agree with you. The dialogue between East and West about what to do with scientific advances, and given that science doesn't answer that question, becomes really, really difficult. Does Buddhism affect this at all? And then I'll...
Well, the small segment of people that are, yes, they have a different attitude toward how to live and how to live a good life. The problem is that places like China do not consider that. So, and even if you had that religion in China, they wouldn't care. It wouldn't make any difference because you say, well, I'm a Buddhist. They'd probably shoot you first. I mean, I don't mean to be flippant, but when people are starving and they don't care. And then we have also, the United States has been involved, the West has been involved in their business, which is becoming our business. And sometimes we work in tandem with things that we shouldn't. That the oughts are not being considered as they did, let's say, with COVID and all of that came about. That's something that was not supposed to be done. That kind of investigating and experimenting. And you see what happened. And they still didn't tell us. So you see, there's nothing there for us to be able to change, except to stay strong and keep them in their place. Because if they rule the world, we're all in trouble.
Very, very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, Elaine, we have another question from Bill. He says, does moral philosophy have its limits? What about the position of existentialists, hedonists, and skeptics?
Existentialism is basically saying that life has no meaning except what you give it. So there is nothing there that is going to control how you act. Because if you do not give meaning to life, and there is no God in that, it's strictly evolution. God does not partake in that philosophy. So you're here on earth, and if you decide that life has meaning, then it has it. Is there a purpose to life? Only what you give it in terms of meaning. So there's not a very strong moral entity to this because it's all very singular. You can think what you want. And it looks very attractive to a lot of people because they can determine what life is for and about and how you act. But someone who believes the opposite of that will not think like that. So moral philosophy does not really come into the beliefs of existentialists like Jean-Paul Sartre and his people. Although he started to turn around at the end of his life, actually. I believe that he had a quote that said, actually, it's better, you live a better life when you believe than when you don't. So things change and enlightenment comes to some people.
You know that existentialist thinking seems to be at the heart of Planned Parenthood versus Casey as well, which reads, at the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, and of the mystery of human life.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that.
Okay, great. Thank you. I have a question here from Sebastian. He says, the Catholic Church considers life to begin at conception. What do you think Adler meant when he said that fetus is becoming a human and not a banana? Wouldn't the fetus already be human if it ever was?
Well, this person was trying to be cute in the sense that when you look at that, you don't see a human being because it's developing. But it's developing in one area, which is to become human. But because it doesn't look like it, well, then it's easy to kill. If it had a human face, it would be harder. So the argument, actually, that was with Max. He said, but you see, it's on its purpose is to develop into a human being. It can't be anything else when it's fully developed. It will be human. And it can't be a banana or a kumquat or whatever else he said, because you can't see something doesn't mean it doesn't have its purpose. Of course, now they've gone so far ahead that it could be a baby and they would have no trouble in ending its life. Does that answer?
Sebastian, does that answer your question?
Thank you, Elaine. I would simply qualify that at conception, we have a human being.
What did I say?
Becoming human, to say that at all, would be at some point during the fetus's existence that it would not be human.
Right.
And that would it'd be problematic for those of us who think that, well, I mean, for the science that points out that it's human at the moment of conception.
Yes,
it's not a question of opinion. It's a question of science.
Right, I agree. And you think that all these people who love science, because, that's the current thing that's going on, so that's the only reality, you would think that they'd want to know what science and doctors think. But they don't. To them, it's a separate issue.
Right. So when science is put at the service of politics or a political agenda, it becomes ideology.
Yes.
And you lose the connection between faith and science that would make science actually complementary to our faith journey.
Mm-hmm.
But thank you, Elaine, for responding to that question.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Going back to the Eastern philosophy, Bill asks, isn't Eastern philosophy similar to the secular, non-religious Western citizen who sees all viewpoints as equally valid?
Similar to the Western, what did you say after that?
Western citizen, Western people who see all viewpoints as equally valued. The non-religious Western people.
From the East, looking at the West?
Yeah, isn't
Hey.
Eastern philosophy similar to that secular, non-religious Western citizen?
No,
Okay.
no, because a secular citizen can have the same, how can I say this? Can believe in, without just being secular, can have a certain level of principles that they follow. In the Eastern part of the world, they do not think like in communism in China. They do not think or take hold of any of that. It's already the end justifies the means, and everything is based on that. If the secular person, that is not necessarily true. They can be secular and believe that you cannot justify the ends by doing anything you choose. So they're not the same.
Okay, good. Thank you. Terrence has a question. He says, in addition to the Syntopicon, did I say that right?
Yeah.
Okay. A research guide to great books of the Western world, Britannica published the Great Ideas Program, a 10-volume set of reading guides. This set has, as far as I know, long been out of print. Are you aware of any push for its republication?
I didn't know that it was out of print. But I talk to people at Britannica all the time, and I will bring that up and get back to Terry.
Okay. Very good.
I did not know it was out of print.
If it is out of print, I would like to offer the services of Onward Books and Media to bring it back into print. Let them know that too when you talk to them. That you have a publisher in the United States.
Oh,
who
yes.
will bring it back into print if they will not.
Absolutely. You will be the right-hand man.
All right, thank you. Another question from Bill. If scientists are unconcerned with morality, then how would you convince a scientist that being moral is desirable?
Well, I'm not saying that all scientists have no morality because they're not interested in odds. I'm saying that the world of science, when they start working on research and things like this, they have to proceed the way that the evidence shows them. That does not mean that they personally believe it. I'm sure there's plenty of people who have resigned because they cannot do what they've asked them to do. So being in that field, that's a job. It's a job that they have to do. But when some things come up and you are a person of principle, there's not much you can do today except leave, because they will get rid of you anyway. They don't want any dissension in that world. It's very, very tight. And this is what you will do. You saw it here with Dr. Fauci and his crew. They do what he says to do because he controls a great deal of money, actually too much, so that people have to do what he says. And that's in our government. And so we ended up doing experiments and investigations into things that were very, very dangerous if they ever got out. And they did. And unfortunately, the Chinese let their people travel all around the country. They didn't stop them and say, we've got a problem, we have to stop travel, got to lock up. They were actually going all around the world, traveling freely. And that's how it got spread. And that, to me, is totally amoral, because they didn't even bother to tell us. So that's their thinking. In fact, I remember reading that when Napoleon had traveled the world, they asked him when he came back to France, why didn't you stop in China? And he said, and unleash that dragon, I'd rather stay away from it. So people were always aware of their difference, the differences between them and us, meaning East and West.
Oh, you're on mute there.
I see. Thank you very much. Here's a question from Jason. He said, given the political push today of critical race theory in teaching history and current affairs, what is the practical way we can defend teaching the great ideas and great books of Western history as not being racist or irrelevant?
That's what we would all like to see. The problem is they've been doing this kind of thing in schools. I mean, Adler ran into it. Sorry, I call him Adler. I just, forget the doctor part. This is what he was running into in 1930 when teachers wanted to let the students decide what they should have in terms of learning. And he was appalled. He said, why are you giving them the responsibility to decide what they ought to learn when they're students? You should be guiding them, which is what education, the root word is, to lead. If you try to, the problem is that the people that are putting this in have their own ideology. It's not based on common sense. It's not based on results. It's ideology. They believe it. And so if you come up with Western thought, which says issues should be examined and this is wrong, or this is evil, or this isn't giving all men what they need, which is common to all men, they are going to twist what you suggest as being racist. I had an article that I didn't print because it was in the New York Times. That's not why I didn't print it, but I read through the whole article, and it was about a black school, and two of the black children that became valedictorians were not able to take a course that Dr. Adler had created that was in his Fidea project. That was for students that were better students. Or the way the article read, it's because they were white that they were able to take this. Well, finally, when these two black kids, and this is high school, move up in their grades and all of that and become valedictorians, then they could take the course. And the article was complaining that they thought the reason why they couldn't partake is because they were black. And that wasn't the case at all. It had to do with performance and grades. But because they have an ideology that anything like that happening is automatically a race issue, that's what you're fighting against. It would be wonderful if you could convince them, but it's like they have their own religion and their own principles, which aren't very high up. The best thing that COVID did was that kids were being taught in their homes, and parents, for the first time, could see what they were being taught. That's how parents started to get excited about this. They didn't know it, that this critical race theory was being taught, which is another bad sign that parents should be involved in what their kids do. And they should be asked questions, not just assuming that whatever is going on in the school was great. When I was in school and in grammar school, it was an almost totally Jewish grammar school. My mother always said, what did you learn? What were you doing? And I can tell you that we were to tell her everything that was going on. And that's not happening today, because the social media and everything is a distraction from what's important. Not everything is important. So you should have some hierarchy as to what you're going to do and how you're going to examine your children. And I think the problem is everybody wants to know how we can get these people to turn around. And from what I've observed You can't, because they have an ideology. It's like taking an atheist and saying, maybe if we talk to him a little bit more, we can convince him, or read Adler's book on the existence of God. It won't happen. Maybe later, maybe if they wake up, because that's part of what the center's about, to wake people from their slumbers. And most of us are sleeping. And they were just letting everything go along as it doesn't affect us. I don't have a lot of confidence that this could change. I really don't. Just to get rid of it would be the best thing. To complain enough to change the law and get rid of it. That's the way we should do it. But if bad things are left to go on long enough, they take hold.
Okay, well, thank you. Question here from Bill. Given the prevalence of hedonism and nihilism, what appeal does the Center for the Great Ideas have to them? Why would they find the center's focus of interest?
Well, if you're going to hold a philosophy like nihilism, which believes basically in what it says, nothing, then again, you're fighting against an ideology that may or may not be steeped deeply in this person. The best thing for anybody who wants to be educated is to expose themselves to other philosophies so that they can read what somebody else said, and hopefully something affects them in a way that maybe I'm not doing the right thing. Maybe this isn't good enough. And especially with discussions of other people. To stay ignorant about what's going on in different people's lives and what they believe is just an instrument to keep you in a focus that's in a tiny, tiny world. So the whole idea of having the center and discussion groups is that you read something you've never read before. And they usually don't read other things. That's how they get stuck in an ideology. So what would be the problem with exposing themselves to it and maybe seeing some change? So if we don't do that, we don't offer that, there is no hope of changing people's minds. They will stay exactly where they are, and they will have friends that feed that, which is what's happening now. People talk about moral issues all the time if you listen to television. And you know in your heart it's not going to change because these people have an ideology they're not going to give up. But people are beginning to see what's wrong with it because it's affecting their lives. So to me, it's essential that you have this kind of exposure to people who believe in things that really are not going to lead to a good and happy life, which was the whole purpose of life to Aristotle and Dr. Adler and Max, and to Aquinas and everybody involved.
All right, very good. Thank you. Let's talk about the content of the center. Like you have DVDs and other things, and maybe Sebastian can help by taking us through the website. What do you think?
Certainly. Would that be okay, Elaine?
Sure.
Do you need to spotlight me, or can I share my screen? Sheila?
You can share your screen.
Okay.
And I'll spotlight you as well.
I do have the Center for the Study of the Great Ideas at thegreatideas.org, thegreatideas.org, already highlighted or already ready for presentation. So this is the front page of the center, the home page. As far as content is concerned, there are 1,000 newsletters and Elaine is continuing to produce them. In particular, the DVDs, the archived content, can be found here at the store. So the center has products available for purchase by the general public. A lot of DVDs. There's 57 videos that come out of these DVDs, and a whole collection of firing line series. So there's 39 of those. So in the past, meaning last week, if you wanted the series on art, you would have to order the DVD, and you could click add to cart, and the cost is $21.95. And then the DVD itself would then be mailed to you by the fulfillment center. But what Elaine and I are now doing is we're converting all the DVDs to Vimeo for on-demand listening. And you can, instead of waiting for a DVD to arrive, or instead of having to, when a DVD does arrive, place it within a DVD player in order to access the content, you can now, on your mobile device, watch the content from all of these, from all of the DVDs. And so there will be a short introduction at the beginning of each episode. This one happens to be 9 minutes. Elaine and I are in the process of creating a shorter one to introduce people to the subject matter. But right here, at the end of the intro, and you'll see it pop up in a moment, you have the option to rent the DVD for 30 days for $9.99, to buy the DVD, so you'll have it forever on your Vimeo site, for $21.95, which is the same price as the physical product, but with the extended ability to use the content or to play the content on your iPhone or Samsung or whatever. Or you can rent all the episodes, and there are many. There, as I showed you just before, there's about 80 or 90 of them for $29.99. So that's the and you can have them for a full month. If you were to binge watch all of them, you could probably get all of them in 1 month. Or you could just continue the subscription and be able to watch over the course of many months. But this is the best option here. For $30, you get all the content available on a subscription basis. And that is that's the content. So this is the one on art. The ones on the others are on beauty, on change, on democracy, on emotion. Anything that Mortimer Adler and Max Weissman thought were great ideas makes an appearance here. So Elaine?
Those are really very interesting how they came about. This was a 30-minute show that Dr. Adler gave through his Institute of Philosophical Research when he was in California. And they, again, were in boxes, and they were 16 millimeter films, which if you've ever carried one, you know it's very, very heavy. And we had 22 of them. The reason why there's so many that Sebastian brought up is because many of them are divided into four different subtitles, like art has 4 subtitles. So those are included when I say 55 instead of 22. And so those were rescued because Dr. Adler had to move out of that particular building, and that's when they were discovered. And Max saw them as a treasure trove of information because even though they're black and white and it's an earlier time, they are very informative, and it's Dr. Adler doing it. So he gave them to the center for us to do whatever we wanted, and it came out first in tapes, And then now it's in DVD, and then it'll be in streaming. But they are very, very instructive. And I'm glad they didn't end up in the basement somewhere, because we are finding more things as we go along. I recently found something that talks about volume 3-29 of Great Books of the Syntopicon. And it popped up. I can't tell you exactly where it was found, but we're trying to see exactly how much is on there, because we have volume 1 and 2. And so that's a new one that's coming out after we check it over. So there's a lot of things that, even how to read a book was found in Britannica's archives. They didn't even know they had it, and it's the bestseller of what we sell. So who knows what more we can find. And of course, I have boxes of journals, because he also gave seminars. He also gave graduation talks. It's a myriad of things. You could never get them out all at one time. But it's the reason why we're doing this is because without the ideas of another person who is extremely reasonable and logical and has points of view, what do you have to think about? People need prompting. That's what education is. So you get exposed. And if you don't want to be exposed because you have an ideology, that's why it's going to be very difficult to change the people in this country who have that, who don't have any interest in what you're saying.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Jason asks, does the center have a list or suggestion of more modern books that could be added to the great books?
Britannica does. I have a list. The last one that I found was from 1998. It's about 10 pages long, which I'm actually going to send out to the members so they can see that. But I've asked my connection at Encyclopedia Britannica to see if I want something more current. But it's an interesting list, and I think it's worth it for them to at least see what 1998 looked like. So, yes, we can get it. I'm waiting, actually. It's funny he asked, because I'm waiting for an answer on that.
Great. But I'm sure they'll look forward to receiving the list.
Yeah, I'm going to be sending that out next week.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Question from Bill. He said, Elaine said that she sees Catholicism with a small c, and ITEST sees Catholicism with a capital C. What is the difference, and how do they complement each other?
Oh, the only reason that I say that in a lower C is because the word Catholic means universal. I believe, Sebastian, I think that's correct. If you talk about correct. Catholic, okay. So I reduced it to a C because I wanted people to realize that we're talking about something that's universal to everyone. If I capitalize it, then it becomes a religion of a specific kind. And so just for the conversation taking place, and of course ITEST is connected to the theologians in the Catholic Church. But for the people who may be a little skittish that maybe we're talking about doctrine here, we are not. We're talking about things that are common to all men, which is what gives us the ability to talk about philosophy, because we all have that proclivity. So that's why I did that. It was a maneuver, in a sense, to make people realize that we're talking about universals here.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Here's a more basic question. What is the most common mistake people make about philosophy?
Oh, let's see how I'm going to answer that. People don't, in discussions with philosophy, they don't realize that you are talking philosophy almost all the time when you're talking to a friend about an issue. There's a philosophical basis for that, in which you're saying whether something's good or bad, or should we do this, or did you hear what they want to do here? So philosophy is always present. It's the love of wisdom. That's what it's about. And so it's a search. And it's not about information. In fact, Dr. Adler was going to write a book about information highway, which was the internet. And it appalled him that that's all there was on there. It was nothing of any basis, but just a lot of information that you couldn't tell was true or not. And information without discussion or somebody doing a criticism of it or a critique would not lead to knowledge. Information is not knowledge. And so he found it a very vacuous means to communicate to people with something that's important that they could discuss. And that's pretty much what the internet is. It's a lot of information. I don't know how much of it is true, but he was going to, and it wasn't even as bad when he was alive in the beginning of 2000 as it is now with social media and the ability for good and bad to communicate with one another. There's no privacy. And that's what he was concerned about. And he was right, because it all came to fruition. And now we've got a problem. That's what I meant by it and the people that actually were behind the internet, the people that helped create it, were on a show one night, and both men said, we knew what it would do to the young generation that was coming up. And we knew that it would not be good. And that's including phones and all that, but mainly the internet. But we did it anyway. And he said, I have to limit my children. So everything's money. Money, marketing. If you buy it, fine. Because you have to be like other people. So it's a very risky business. And without philosophy and discussing ideas or what do you think, they will never get stopped or reorganized or have controls put on them. There are no controls.
All right, thank you.
But probably the best control would be the parent. Parenting has always been important.
And that's what you hear the least of. You know, like the 19 children that were died, the first thing you look for, where's the parent? Well, they're not in any better shape either. One's not around, and the other, I believe, was a drug addict. But that's the first thing you say, where's the parent? Well, kids have to have freedom. And I laugh when I think of that, because if I were to have told my parents that that's my room and it's private and you can't go in any drawers or anything, or I want a lock put on it, the response would have been instantaneous. If you want a lock on your room, you'll have to move out because there's no locks in this house. And kids get away with that. Parents are intimidated. They don't want to hurt their feelings. Oh, okay. It's a very permissive society. And that's why this kind of information and reading material is so important. And they still fought it in 1930. But
okay.
We all have the proclivity to philosophize. And it's not enough just to say that. The answer is ideas. And if you can't understand what's going on, then you should be investigating the great ideas, because it will help you to understand yourself and the society in which we live. And there was an encyclical letter, actually, that was from Pope John Paul II on the relationship between faith and reason. in essence, acknowledged that philosophy is everybody's business. And it was fides et ratio. Is that right, Sebastian? The way I said it?
Right, fides et ratio.
Fides et ratio. That's after 7 years of Latin. I still have to ask somebody else.
But you have a French
how to
background.
pronounce it.
You have a French background, though, so it makes sense that you would drop the T.
Yes, you're right. See? It's, English is the only language, because I've had Greek and I've had French. It's the only, I can spell, if you tell me the words for a sentence in French, I can spell it exactly as it should be, because that's how the rules are. But when you write an English sentence, there is no, because the words cannot be just translated right to print. You have to look at the where it appears in the sentence, how does it go, and even Greek was easier in terms of that. English is very difficult, and it also has so many words to it. It's probably, I've always thought it might be more poetic, because Greek has a word for a certain thing, which means a lot of things in that one word. And in English, it's not that way. You talk about love, but it's not enough. Whereas if you say the word for love in Greek, it's telling you what kind right away. Anyway, I'm glad for Pope John Paul II. I'm sure he was a great guy.
He was, for sure. Another question. Can Elaine tell us if the center is still looking to publish the articles she recently found that were designed for families to do great book studies at home?
What article are they talking about? The Padea? The homeschooling? I don't remember sending that.
I'm not sure. JP, I'm not sure if you could come online and maybe clarify. No, I'm not seeing that person come on.
JP is on an iPhone and may not be able to unmute himself.
Right.
We can ask to unmute.
I did.
And JP may receive a signal telling him what to do.
Yeah, maybe we'll come back to that one.
Who is JP? Who is JP?
I don't know.
Just says JP know. iPhone.
It's the name of what? The iPhone.
Oh, John Pinto is his name.
Oh, okay, I know.
Yeah. John, are you able to unmute and clarify your question? Possibly not. We will come back to him and maybe he can clarify by typing the question. So let's go to another question. What is important about the Syntopicon?
The Syntopicon, other than the marketing tool that it was genius to do, what it did was it took 8 years for these philosophers, and they were well known, to put together all what the greats had said about different subjects. Freedom. All of a sudden, I can't think of all of them. I believe the only one that's not there is equality. So it took all the main 102 great ideas, and actually Dr. Adler said the most he could shrink it to was 92. But the reason it came up to be 102 is because they didn't want to have different topics under one heading. And it was much easier, because it would have made it too long, much easier to break them apart. And that's how the 102 came. But it was always going to be around that area. And the beauty of it is that ours, you have a searchable PDF on there. So when you want to see what somebody said about it, you can put that in and it'll go there rather than you searching and searching. So to have a searchable PDF is a great plus. But those works were there to entice people with all these different ideas, and then to say, well, I guess I'm going to have to buy the great books, which has the original writers and their thoughts. And it took 400,000 scholarly hours, according to Dr. Adler. And it increases your ability to think about what the ideas are that are the most important. I believe equality was left out because it's more of a current topic that keeps changing. And in fact, in Athens, when they were writing about democracy, and the idea that people would be equal, they found that to be the most difficult part, because everywhere in the world, from even back there, had slavery. And slavery was not reduced to just blacks. It was all over. It still goes on now. And they didn't quite know how they were going to work that, because Athens had slaves, Spartans had the helots, and there was no machinery. So people use the word slave almost as if the United States invented it. And it's so totally untrue. It's been around, and until they had the machinery to change it, and until the ideas of equality, which were in the Constitution of the United States, changed it, which we should have done, it was left to continue to grow. And there was a great deal of money to be made. It was during the textile revolution, and they needed cotton. I mean, if people would learn history about when all this takes place, so that they know the context in which these things happen, instead of taking them out of the air and saying, we had slavery. That gives you nothing until you can put it exactly what had happened, what was going on at the time. And right now in schools, history is not a big subject, which I'm sure other people have known as well, and they're not happy with it. How can you learn anything without knowing the context of when these things were done? And the ancients had the same problem. Democracy wasn't a lightning rod for other countries. In fact, when they proposed it to other people, mainly oligarchs, they were appalled at the idea that the people were going to have control of the country. But they don't know anything. They can't run themselves. And that idea is still prevalent today. Better the government take care of it. Of course, that's where all the money goes. So, of course, they like that too. But no, it was a very hard sell. I don't think they sold anybody, actually. Maybe the Romans, just some. But not exactly.
Okay, thank you. Another more basic question. What makes the great books great?
Mark Twain, at one time, it said that the great books are the books, this is a quote, the great books are the books that everybody wants to have read. And they recognize that these books, according to Twain, and it's true, furnish the enlightenment and entertainment so closely identified with an educated person. But people just don't do what they ought to do, so they read other things. And if you are going to consider yourself an educated person, then it would be very good to have a book that can be read and read again and again in the endless pursuit, according to Twain, of the wisdom they contain. That's not true of a lot of modern books. In fact, once is enough for a lot of them. But Robert Hutchins made a great quote as well. What makes great books great which he wrote in the introduction to the great books of the Western world, 25 at that time, years ago. We know it's much more. Among other things, they teach something you learn every time you read them. And every time you read them, something that you didn't see before is in there. And you understand something you've missed. And I would say that that is probably the great difference between a great book and a not a great book, because of the ideas that are in there. And I know Mortimer Adler has read, he had a book that he read probably 10 times. And it's almost the same principle of watching a movie. You watch it once, there's no way that all the director's things that he wants in there for you to see are going to be seen. Now, I'm not saying it's a great movie, but the fact is you can't get enough out of one reading. And most books today you're lucky if you finish them. These have a way of teaching you an idea that is universal to all people, not just to the people in the book. That's what makes them also valuable.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Here's another question from Jason. As a member of the Center for Economic and Social Justice, we teach the economic paradigm of Louis Kelso and Adler. How much does the Center of the Great Ideas teach the economics of Kelso and Adler?
I'm sorry, I'd have to get back to him. I know who Kelso is, but I don't have the answer to that.
All right, another
But
question.
I can find an article to send him where it will be in there, because I've gone through the library a lot, and I know what he's talking about. But I will get that out and send it as a journal to everyone.
Great. Another question. What is the difference between common sense and wisdom?
Well, somebody had been in a seminar, and they were touting the fact that how wonderful it was that she had common sense, that everybody had told her. And she said, isn't that equal to being wise, having common sense? And Max had told her, no, common sense is a good thing, but it is not an end in itself. It's a means to the end of wisdom. So if you have it, it might be easier for you. But people who don't have it can also appreciate the end, which is wisdom. So no, they're not equal at all. One is the beginning and one is the end. What you use it for is to become wise. It's nice if you have it. But as Adler used to say, it's the most uncommon sense of all. And we kind of know that from talking to other people. Sometimes it's blatantly, you're aware that things don't connect, but you can improve it. You can always improve yourself.
Yes, we can, can't we?
That's why we're here.
Right. We have a clarification on John Pinto's question about publishing the articles that you recently found designed for families. He said, I think it was called the Family Participation Plan. He said that you found some booklets within the past few years and sent an example of a few of them to the members of the Great Ideas. At the time you found them, you said you would try to find all of them and publish them. And it might be very popular with families, he said.
Well, is he talking in the last 5 years? Because I think he's talking before.
Within the past few years, he said. And yes, in the past 5 years, he said.
And this is John telling? Is
Yes.
John talking?
Yes.
Would you please send me an email on this?
I found it, Elaine. Do you want me to show it on the screen?
Sure.
So the Great Ideas, it's journal 1073, the Great Ideas Program Family Participation Plan. And yeah.
Oh, that booklet I sent out. Yes.
So my publishing house would be happy to publish this for you or make it available. And
Okay.
we can put it on your website that people can get on the as least expensively as possible. It looks like there's...
This was early on. I can remember when I copied this thing.
Yeah.
I didn't have one in good condition. Actually, somebody sent it to me.
Well, we can discuss that offline.
John, I'd be happy to talk to you about this. It's like, well, even the best of us don't remember everything, right? Nobody ever says they don't know, so I have to do that. I remember it now when I see the piece. Yeah. And it wasn't in, I had to, that was early on when I was scanning those things. Didn't have a perfect piece. But as I go through the computer, I find many, many, many things I didn't have at the beginning, an awareness of. And I still have the same computer, but getting better. It's getting better.
Okay, great. And yes, John confirmed that that is what he was talking about.
Okay. All right, John.
We're good here. Okay.
We will talk later.
Okay, we have about 10 minutes remaining and no additional questions in the chat room. So maybe we could open up the mics if anybody has something they would like to ask or discuss for a few minutes. So if anybody would like to propose a question or discussion item, you can unmute. And
maybe Sheila, unspotlight, and so that everybody's on the screen at the same time.
I can do that.
And I'll change my view to gallery view.
Yes.
So I can see everybody. There are 7 cameras on, 8 cameras now, and 16 participants in the room. So those of you who would like to participate and be seen on the recording, feel free to open your cameras. And I could start out by just tossing out a seed question, if that's helpful. For those of you who are members of the Center for the Study of the Great Ideas, I might ask, what makes, do you see a value added in this partnership with ITEST? We can put on webinars like this anytime we like. We have access to a radio station, WCAT Radio, and a publishing house. And we have a promotional base that can assist the center in reaching into dioceses and reaching into colleges and universities. We're Catholic, but as Elaine said, we're also Catholic. We're universal. We engage in ecumenical and interreligious dialogue. We invite everyone into a conversation. And since 1968, ITEST has been inviting people into the conversation of the relationship between faith and science and technology, the relationship among those 3 things. And every single conversation I've had since I've been involved with ITEST since 2008 has centered on philosophy. So the relationship with the Center for the Study of the Great Ideas is a good partnership from the perspective of ITEST because it helps us better understand the philosophical underpinnings and foundation of our theological and scientific and technological conversations. And those of you who are members of the Center, what are your thoughts about the relationship with an organization like ours that tries to explore everything? So I'll just leave it there. Anybody can speak.
Seems promising to me.
Thank you.
a great idea. I did have an experience that I thought might be interesting when this is quite a few years ago. I had gone to Sri Lanka to be able to be at the ordination of two young men who had been studying at the Pontifical College Josephinum in Columbus, Ohio. And they intrigued me into going by saying, well, if we can get you a ticket cheap enough, would you go? And they did. I said, where am I going to stay? Because your family is so large. And they said, oh, there's lots of convents. You can stay at one of the convents there, because I am a religious sister. And so anyway, I ended up going. And it was an experience that totally changed my life, totally changed my perspective of other people, because there were Buddhists, there were Hindus, and there were Catholics and Christians. Every morning you heard the Muslim call to prayer, and that woke you. And when the priest had his reception for his ordination, the people had gone to each of the neighbors, whether they were Hindu or a Buddhist, whether they were Tamil or whether they were Sinhala or whether they were none of the above. And they borrowed the dishes because they didn't have enough dishes to be able to have the reception. And after the reception was over and they washed all the dishes, they put them into piles, and on the top of each pile for each family, they had put food that was remaining from the celebration. And then they took them back to all these neighbors. And I thought, wow, I mean, what a wonderful, wonderful idea. And they also told me that the mailmen who were Catholic did not have to deliver mail on Sunday. Those that were Muslim did not have to deliver mail on Friday. And those that were Jewish did not have to deliver mail on Saturday. And I thought, wow, this is an ideal idea. Now, the country was in civil war at the time, and I did go 3 years later to the area where the Civil War had been modified for 3 months. I was at the tail end of it. And the sisters there were just so beautiful. And I was so amazed at how the priest who was having mass during the retreat that I was leading. And he said, now be very careful, because I've listened to the Tigers and are saying that the shooting is going to resume in a few days. And I barely got out of the city. That was quite an adventure, being in an ambulance and trying to get through at midnight, the checkpoints of each of the cities. But we got out. And because of AmeriCares, I was able to give them the medicine that I had brought. I had brought 20 pounds of medicine and take it to their hospital. In the hospital, they had one shelf that had 4 bottles of medicine on it. It was just, I mean, but I sat with people and they were without limbs. I sat with people who had been, injured so severely in the war, and they all had the same want. It didn't matter whether they were Tamil or whether they were Buddhist or Hindu. They all had the same wants. And I thought, if only we could realize that people are people and they all have the same needs, that not just wants, but needs. And as I say, when I came back, I just embraced everybody that I knew, didn't matter who they were. And I realized that we are all God's children.
Thank you. It's true.
That's what makes natural law work, right?
Yes.
We're rational participants in the eternal law. So.
I would like to also add that in our day and age, one of the first things sacrificed in our media is truth. We have conspiracy theories. We have alternate facts, which is nonsense. And yet, because there is not the critical ability to think through the great ideas and to really take on, as you might say, the hedonism and the existentialism, because we don't have a capacity for critical thinking to recognize truth from falsity. This is a key philosophical crippling in our age. So I think the union of great ideas with ITEST is a step in that right direction. That we train people to think critically and not to be getting on the first bandwagon that wants your money.
What is your name?
I'm Sister Carla Mae Streeter. I'm at Aquinas Institute in St. Louis.
Oh, I see.
I'm a board member with ITEST.
Ah, okay. Thank you, sister. Well, I did all the good ones, Aquinas for high school and the French and Sacred Heart.
Okay, great. Well, we have one more comment. It's from Bill. And after that, we will wrap up with prayer with Sister Marie Louise. So go ahead, Bill.
Dr. Mahfood asked about how people who are members of the center view the relationship, and I remain at this point undecided. I'm asking questions which you, Sheila, have very kindly agreed to pass along. But one of the questions that I have for right now is, what is there about science and technology that requires a theological encounter?
Sure. And Bill, I can provide an initial response to that. I sent you a couple of pages in response to each of the questions that you provided. Not a couple of pages for each question, but what probably would come out to a couple of pages if I were to cut and paste it into a Word doc. So that's in your email right now, and I responded to all of those questions. But one of the principal founding points of ITEST was that in discovering the world, we could encounter God. And that is, if we can perceive philosophically that there is a mind that created and designed all of this cosmos, and St. Thomas comes up with 5 proofs for the existence of God. His proofs are not proofs for a relationship with God. That is, that the personal creator, or the creator who has a personal relationship or wants a personal relationship with us, comes later. It's what we discern through our own desire, our own engagement, or our own understanding of Scripture and tradition. And the fact that if a God took time to create us, that he might want a response from us, some kind of participation. So there's a lot to unpack in just that. But if we discover the world, we can discover God's mechanics. We can more intentionally engage in an encounter with the Creator through our discernment of His creation. And so when we come up with a new scientific discovery, it's not, as the material reductivist would say, another gap that's filled in our ability to realize that we're alone in the world and there are natural processes that just come together on their own. What it is an opportunity to humble ourselves even further, knowing that there are things that the Creator has provided that we're able to discover to get a better insight into His mind, and to get a better understanding of this awesome creation in which we live. So that would be the basic principle. By discovering the world, we can encounter God because created in his image and likeness, that was one of the first things that he asked us to do. He asked Adam to name all of the animals and to tend the garden, to tend and be a steward of the creation that he provided. So that may give us a start of an answer that we can continue working through over time. But please do read the email that I sent to you earlier this morning when you have the opportunity. And feel free to respond.
Okay, well, we are about ready to wrap up. I'm going to hand it over to Sebastian, who will do our closing comments.
Thank you, Sheila. So at this point, I would like to thank Elaine for her presentation and for putting together the substance for this opportunity for us to come together in dialogue. In conclusion, Sister Marie-Louise Pullman, a sister of St. Francis of Penance and Christian Charity, will offer our closing prayer. Sister Marie-Louise?
Lord, you have given us senses to take in information, eyes to see, ears to hear, noses to smell, tongue to taste, skin to feel, but you also gave us common sense, which enables us to make choices that benefit ourselves, others, and all the peoples of the future. Please help us to acquire the information that is true, valid, and all-encompassing, so that we can make good decisions for ourselves, our families, our city, our country, and our planet, Earth, Mother Earth. You know we want to do the right thing, which will benefit the majority. You also know how our egos can get in the way, how misinformation can sway our feelings, how greed can push us into wrongful directions. You understand our fear of making wrong choices when we are given conflicting information, especially involving the sources of energy in a world of big business, the ethical and moral issues of abortion, the value of free trade benefits versus tariffs, prejudice, voting rights, immigration. You gave us the 10 Commandments that give us a guide to proper attitudes and actions. Then you gave us Jesus to add love to these attitudes and actions with the Beatitudes. Help us learn more to put these guidelines into action. Help us understand the value of philosophy in giving us principles that enlighten our minds, give courage to our hearts, and give energy to our actions to make this world a home free of fear, conflict, and war. We ask this in the name of God, our Creator, Jesus, our Redeemer, and the Holy Spirit, who enlightens our minds and hearts. Amen.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.